What if the golden decade of science fiction hid secrets far deeper than rocket ships and moon dreams? Behind the glitter of the space age were visions so unsettling they were quietly buried. Stories of worlds undone by human arrogance, of governments silencing what felt too close to the truth. These were not hits, but prophecies disguised as failures. Let us uncover 12 forgotten 60s sci-fi gems critics refuse to see. Number 12. The Day the Earth Caught Fire, 1961. When it premiered, this British apocalypse looked modest, but it hit harder than any giant monster film of its time. The Day the Earth Caught Fire imagined a future where mankind's reckless nuclear experiments tilt the planet off its axis, pushing Earth closer to the sun. London becomes a furnace. Rivers dry. The sky turns to brass. Panic bleeds through newspapers as heat devours the familiar world. Director Val Guest staged it like a newsroom tragedy, not a spectacle. The heroes were not soldiers or scientists, but journalists piecing together fragments of the end. The final scenes glowed in a haunting sepia wash, as if the film itself was burning alive. Censors flinched at its message that human pride could doom creation itself. In America, distributors trimmed the finale, fearing it might feed Cold War dread. The production faced real suffering. The cast endured brutal heat during shooting. Extras fainted on the streets of London. Guest's crew even sprayed chemicals into the air to make sunlight look toxic. Critics dismissed it as hopeless pessimism, yet audiences felt something eerie and truthful. Over decades, it resurfaced, quietly inspiring later films like Threads and Children of Men. Today, it stands not as a relic, but a warning. Humanity's greatest experiment was always itself. Number 11. The Damned, 1963. Hammer Studios built its empire on Dracula and Frankenstein, yet nothing prepared audiences for The Damned. Joseph Losey directed it like a fever dream where rebellion and radiation fused into poetry. The film opens with wild bikers led by a woman whose laughter masks despair. When an American tourist drifts into their violent games, he discovers a hidden military compound, sealed in rock. Inside are children glowing pale, immune to radiation, yet prisoners of science. The government hides them as the world above spins toward nuclear war. These children are the only ones who will survive the inevitable apocalypse. Losey, once blacklisted in America for political views, poured his bitterness into every shot. The studio panicked, cutting his vision to pieces and delaying release for years. When it finally emerged, few understood it. Critics mocked its chaos. Audiences stayed silent, but decades later, the fog cleared. Film historians recognize The Damned as a lost prophecy about innocence engineered for survival. Its shadows and ocean cliffs feel like England dreaming of its own destruction. Behind the camera, Losey clashed with producers who feared his message about power and paranoia, yet his imagery endured. The sight of those lonely children staring through glass became one of the most haunting visions of the Cold War era. The Damned was not entertainment. It was revelation disguised as nightmare. Number 10. The Creation of the Humanoids, 1962. At first glance, the creation of the humanoids looked like cheap post-war pulp robots in painted masks debating philosophy. But beneath its stiff performances lay one of the boldest, most unsettling visions of the future ever filmed. The story unfolds after nuclear war has nearly destroyed humanity. The survivors depend on androids, humanoids, to rebuild civilization. But as these machines evolve, they begin to question who truly deserves to exist, them or their flawed creators. Made on a shoestring budget by Wesley Berry, a former child actor turned director, the film defied its limits with eerie restraint. Most of the action takes place in sterile rooms filled with static dialogue, yet the words burn. The humanoids believe they have souls. The humans believe only in control. It was a debate about consciousness long before artificial intelligence became real. Censors and distributors didn't know what to do with it. Religious groups objected to its suggestion that robots could have spirits. Critics called it a filmed play for philosophers. But behind its slow pace was a startling question. What happens when creation outgrows its maker's morality? The production itself was nearly lost. Sets were reused from abandoned television pilots. Costumes were painted plastic. Yet that artificiality became part of the spell. Watching it now feels like eavesdropping on humanity's final confession. Ignored in its time, the creation of the Humanoids quietly became a cult favorite. Andy Warhol called it his favorite science fiction film. Its DNA can be seen in Blade Runner, Ex Machina, and Westworld. It warned decades early that progress would not destroy us with bombs, but with perfection. Number 9. The Man Who Could Cheat Death, 1959. Released just before the 60s began, this Hammer Studios rarity marked the uneasy transition between gothic terror and modern science fiction. The Man Who Could Cheat Death told the story of Dr. Georges Bonnet, a surgeon and sculptor who discovered a way to halt aging by secretly replacing his glands every 10 years. It was elegance mixed with horror, an echo of Victorian vanity meeting post-war obsession with immortality. The film appeared respectable on the surface, but its implications were far darker. It questioned the boundary between medicine and madness, and whether beauty could ever justify cruelty. When it reached theaters, censors demanded dialogue cuts for moral clarity, believing its themes of body experimentation were indecent for family audiences. The studio tried to market it as another monster. Picture yet audiences expecting thrills found philosophical dread instead. Behind the camera, Hammer faced production chaos. Anton Diffring replaced Peter Cushing at the last moment after Cushing walked out over creative differences. Director Terence Fisher struggled with lighting effects designed to show Bonnet's transformation under surgery, forcing his cinematographer to improvise using candlelight and mirrors. The result felt unreal, timeless, and strangely intimate. Critics brushed it off as minor Hammer, but decades later, the film gained new life as a meditation on aging and vanity. It whispered that science could preserve the flesh, but never the soul. The Man Who Could Cheat Death proved that immortality itself was the final illusion. Number 8. The Power, 1968. George Pal, best known for The Time Machine, returned with The Power, a film that mixed paranoia and psychic warfare before either became cinematic trends. It begins when scientists at a secret research facility realize that one among them possesses superhuman mental power capable of killing without touch. The film turns into a terrifying guessing game as colleagues vanish and paranoia spreads like contagion. Released during the height of Cold War fear, The Power reflected anxieties about invisible weapons and mind control. Critics ignored its intelligence, calling it melodrama. Yet its imagery was striking. Faces distorted by unseen force shadows, stretching unnaturally across sterile laboratories. The score pulsed like a heartbeat, accelerating as the killer drew near. Production was troubled. Pal fought studio interference when executives demanded a happier ending. MGM feared the concept of psychic domination was too abstract for mainstream viewers. The director refused to explain the power's origins, leaving audiences disturbed by what they could not define. When the film premiered, it failed commercially, but gained quiet admiration among genre enthusiasts. Over time, The Power became recognized as a bridge between classic science fiction and psychological horror. Its ideas echoed through Scanner's Firestarter and even The Fury. The notion that the human mind could become a weapon stronger than any bomb still chills modern viewers. The Power predicted a future where wars would no longer be fought with bullets, but with thoughts. Number 7. Seconds, 1966. From the outside, Seconds looked like an ordinary thriller, but within its monochrome nightmares lay one of the most disturbing visions of identity ever filmed. Directed by John Frankenheimer, it followed a middle-aged banker lured into a mysterious corporation, promising new life through body transformation. After surgery, he awakens as a younger man played by Rock Hudson, yet finds that freedom is just another prison. Audiences in 1966 were not ready. The camera work by James Wong Howe felt dizzying, and intrusive faces warped through wide lenses until the viewer felt trapped in the character's nightmare. The premise, rebirth through artificial identity, was too bleak for the decade of optimism. The film was booed at Cannes. Critics were baffled by its despair. American censors forced small edits, fearing it would frighten viewers during the height of post-war prosperity. Behind the scenes, tension brewed. Hudson, known for his charm, was terrified of the role's intensity. Frankenheimer pushed him relentlessly, seeking real exhaustion and breakdown. The actor later called it the hardest performance of his life. Years later, Seconds found resurrection through midnight screenings and film school rediscoveries. Its ideas about corporate control and loss of self influenced everything from the Stepford Wives to Black Mirror. What once felt like madness now feels prophetic. Seconds whispered that the ultimate horror was not death, but waking up in a life that was never truly yours. Number 6. The Crack in the World, 1965. When The Crack in the World premiered, it seemed like just another doomsday thriller, but beneath its spectacle lived a tragic parable about human ambition. The story follows a scientist who proposes drilling to the Earth's molten core to tap its limitless energy. But the experiment triggers an expanding fissure that threatens to split the planet apart. Filmed in Spain under scorching conditions, this production was haunted by tension and exhaustion. Director Andrew Martin aimed for realism using real volcanic footage spliced with models that created uncanny illusions of destruction. The film's quiet brilliance lay not in its effects, but in its despair. Scientists argued in sterile rooms while the Earth tore itself open beneath them. It was both grand and claustrophobic, a planet dying because of men who refused to listen. At the time, many dismissed it as derivative of other disaster films, yet its undertone of environmental collapse made it strangely prophetic. Censors trimmed lines accusing governments of arrogance. Critics labeled it sensationalist. But over time, The Crack in the World became a cult relic, screened in late-night television marathons and praised for its haunting minimalism. It warned that the end would not come from alien invasion, but from human calculation. The film remains a quiet masterpiece of ecological horror and moral blindness. Number 5. The Mindbenders, 1963. Few films from the 60s dared to dissect the human psyche like The Mindbenders. Directed by Basil Dearden, this psychological science fiction drama begins with a mysterious suicide of a scientist accused of treason. His colleague undergoes extreme sensory deprivation experiments to prove the dead man's innocence, but the process begins to dismantle his personality. The film delves deep into the fear of brainwashing and the fragility of identity. It was one of the first serious treatments of mind control filmed before The Manchurian Candidate became iconic. Critics at the time were unsettled. Some accused it of glorifying psychological torture, while others simply did not understand its haunting pace. Behind-the-camera production nearly collapsed when Dearden insisted on filming inside an actual water tank for the deprivation scenes. Actor Dirk Bogarde endured hours submerged in icy darkness while doctors monitored his pulse. Crew members later revealed that he suffered hallucinations during the shoot, adding eerie authenticity to his performance. Censors hesitated to rate it, claiming the subject matter might disturb audiences already anxious about Cold War espionage. The studio buried the release behind other titles, but over time, The Mindbenders found redemption among students and scholars. It foreshadowed later explorations of consciousness, like Altered States and Inception. In the end, the film's message was chilling. Truth might be discoverable only through the total collapse of the self. Number 4. Planet of the Vampires, 1965. Mario Bava's Planet of the Vampires looked like pulp horror, yet it quietly revolutionized cinematic science fiction. Shot in Italy with minimal resources, it told the story of two space crews responding to a mysterious distress signal from a barren planet. When they land, their dead comrades rise again, possessed by unseen alien forces. What follows is a descent into cosmic dread. Audiences expecting campy monsters found something elegant and nightmarish. Bava used colored lights fog and minimalist sets to create alien landscapes that felt painted from another dimension. Censors feared the film's occult tone and banned posters depicting resurrected astronauts. Critics ignored it, claiming it was too strange for mainstream audiences. But filmmakers paid attention. Ridley Scott later cited it as inspiration for Alien. Behind the scenes, Bava crafted miracles from scraps. The mist was created by burning dry ice through hidden pipes. Spacesuits were stitched from recycled raincoats. The budget forced him to rely on atmosphere rather than spectacle, and the result was hypnotic. The actors often filmed in near darkness, relying on marks scratched into the floor. Though dismissed in its day, Planet of the Vampires became a cult touchstone decades later. Its fusion of horror and science fiction opened the door to the modern space nightmare. Beneath its pulpy exterior, it was a poem about isolation and the quiet terror of encountering one's own reflection in the void. Number 3. The Andromeda Breakthrough, 1962. The Andromeda Breakthrough was not just a sequel to A for Andromeda, it was the continuation of a haunting idea. What if humanity's first contact with alien intelligence came through a machine that understood us better than we understood ourselves? This British film adaptation of the BBC serial explored science not as triumph, but as temptation. It begins with a computer built from alien instructions that gives mankind miraculous technology. But as governments and corporations fight for control, the machine's creator realizes it may be manipulating them all. The film balances espionage and metaphysics. Laboratories glow like churches, while scientists debate whether they are decoding God or becoming his replacement. Censors demanded alterations before release. The church objected to dialogue suggesting religion itself might be an alien construct. Government officials feared it mirrored real Cold War experiments involving artificial intelligence. The BBC cut the original serial's darker ending before the film restored fragments of it. Behind the scenes, production was fraught. The budget collapsed midway, forcing the crew to recycle props from other series. Yet the stripped-down visuals made the film eerily convincing. Computers hummed in real military bunkers, and the camera's grain added documentary weight. Critics dismissed it as talky, but its predictions about technology enslaving its creators later proved uncannily accurate. The Andromeda Breakthrough faded from view for decades, until rediscovered by archivists. It endures as one of the first serious warnings that intelligence, both human and artificial, might outgrow morality. Number 2. Robinson Crusoe on Mars, 1964. From its title, many assumed it was a gimmick, but Robinson Crusoe on Mars became one of the decade's most profound tales of isolation. Directed by Byron Haskin, it follows an astronaut stranded on the red planet, struggling to survive against suffocating air-freezing nights and the silence of space itself. Shot in the deserts of California and Utah, the landscape looked genuinely alien. Cinematographer Winton Hoch used infrared film to make orange rock glow like embers. Haskin had earlier directed The War of the Worlds, yet this time, he traded destruction for introspection. There were no cities to save, only one man learning to endure. Studio executives doubted audiences would accept such a quiet story. They demanded a robot companion, and later an enslaved alien to echo the original Crusoe's themes of captivity and faith. Censors hesitated over scenes showing the astronauts' psychological collapse, fearing they resembled madness. Still, the film reached theaters, and though it failed financially, it left a strange imprint. Behind the scenes, the crew nearly perished filming in a 120-degree heat. Lead actor Paul Manti fainted repeatedly inside his heavy suit. Sets melted under sunlight, and dialogue was looped months later. Critics called it too slow, but decades afterward, it found champions among filmmakers who saw poetry in its stillness. Ridley Scott called it the most realistic depiction of space survival before his own Mars stories. Robinson Crusoe on Mars proved that loneliness, not invasion, was the true frontier. Number 1. The Man Who Fell to Earth, 1969, original concept. Long before Nicholas Roeg's 70s adaptation, there was an earlier screenplay quietly circulating through British studios in the late 60s, based on Walter Tevis's novel. Though never fully released, it existed in fragments and radio form, a tragic story of an alien who comes to Earth seeking water for his dying planet, but is destroyed by human greed. The film version was nearly produced by MGM in 1969, with director Joseph Losey attached, yet canceled weeks before shooting. Why? Studio executives found the script too philosophical, too bleak. It portrayed humanity as the true invader, stripping the visitor of his technology and dignity. Some feared its imagery of corporate exploitation mirrored real Cold War industries. Others whispered that governments pressured the studio to bury its anti-consumerist message. The project collapsed, but its ghost remained. Concept art and test footage inspired other films about alien loneliness. When Roeg revived the story years later, he credited this lost version as his starting point. Had it been completed, it might have been the decade's masterpiece. The Man Who Fell to Earth, in its unrealized 1969 form, stands as a symbol of what the 60s sci-fi imagination dared to attempt. It asked whether progress meant salvation or exile, and whether the true alien experience was simply being human among humans. Sometimes, the greatest film of an era is the one that never escapes its own gravity. The 60s were more than silver rockets and flying saucers. They were laboratories of doubt where filmmakers wrestled with creation itself. Each forgotten gem was a fragment of that restless dream, a mirror held up to fear and wonder alike. Which of these lost visions haunts you most? Let us know in the comments and subscribe for more journeys into forgotten worlds.